Hey everybody, I'm Howard, and this is Otter's Retirement Corner. So let's talk today about part-time jobs in retirement. I was meaning to do a video on this for a while, and then I got prompted by Buzz at Buzz's Retirement Garage. Um, so Buzz, I'm not just copying you. I was planning to do something about this. You brought it up for you personally, so I thought maybe this is a good time to talk about it. Let me first say this, and I've said this before in other videos going way back, talking about Sarasota Tim specifically. In my opinion, if you're working in retirement, you're not actually retired. It's semantics, I get it, but when you say retirement to me, you quit working completely. Some people retire from one of two jobs, and they're still working. Are they retired? Again, semantics. It just something I want to be consistent on. So anyway, what happens with a lot of people is before they retire, quit totally, they may be working a job where they're working 40, 48 hours a week, whatever it is, and they cut it down to 15, 10, 12, whatever, and they consider that now they're retired, but they're, they still got, the same job, they're still making the same hourly wage, whatever that is. And again, to me, it's not retirement. You just reduce your workload, and it's quasi semi-retirement, and that's okay. And that happens with a lot of people. And it's actually a really good way to make the segue from full-time work to full-time retirement. It gives you a taste of it. If you could reverse it back and go back full-time and have that option, a lot of people might want to do that and do that. So that's a good thing. But let's talk more about after you retire, and you either want to or need to work. So and I'll talk about my situation at the end and my personal take on this. So why do people do that? Why do they retire? In Buzz's case, I'm sorry, Buzz, I forget what you are, 63, 64 years old, whatever, coming up to 65. Buzz saw a reduction in his YouTube, revenue, which, and you could argue, is YouTube a job? For those people, putting out video 1, 2, 3 a day, yeah, it's a job in my mind. I do maybe 2 or 3 a week. I don't look at this as a job. If I did, I'd quit doing it, to be honest. But Buzz was making a significant income from it, and it's gone down a little bit for whatever reason, and he's looking to maybe replace that. He may or may not go to work. Certainly up to him, his personal decision, and I would, if I were his friend, and if I knew him, I think I would be his friend. I would support him in wanting to do whatever he wanted to do in that respect. But what drives most retirees to work? One of the biggest is boredom. Especially if you're single, and you quit work and you just have no idea what to do with yourself, and you're okay with working, and you go out and you find a job, well, again, 10, 12, 15, 20 hours, whatever it is, that fills your needs. People get a job because they're bored. The scarier one for a lot of people is loneliness. Again, especially if you're single and you don't have a good circle of friends or relatives living nearby, sometimes the loneliness will push you to seek a job where you can be around people and have some social contact. And why I say it's the scarier one is because eventually, at some point, you're going to have to face that again. Whether it's at 70 or 72 or 76, whatever age, you're just not going to want to work or be allowed to work anymore, and you're going to face that loneliness again, and it is scary, and I understand that. Hopefully in that time between getting a job and working part-time and filling those lonely hours and then losing that job, you find another social network somewhere, somehow. But that's a big reason, unfortunately. And the last one, not the last one, but the last significant one is you need the money. You calculated wrong, you thought you had enough savings, you thought your Social Security was going to be enough, you thought whatever your income sources were going to be enough, but they turned out not to be. Or you found out your expenses were much higher because you didn't really do the homework on it, or circumstances just raised your expenses. Buzz in particular talked about a new sewer line going in, and you've got a huge outlay for it. If I remember correctly, he doesn't really have an option. They're just putting in a new sewer line. And it could be 100 things. It could be, your roof got damaged, you need a new roof. These $20,000 plus projects. I'm not talking about, you long for a pool and you spend $75,000 putting in a pool. That's another thing. And if you want to do that, that's fine. But no one's stopping you. I'm fortunate enough to have a pool. It's 93 degrees here. I'm sweating already from sitting here 5 minutes. I like it 93 degrees, so that's okay. I'm not complaining. For those of you in cold weather areas, I'm not complaining. If you're jealous, that's why I moved here. All right, so, again, if you need the money, get the job. But now the question becomes, and Buzz talked about this a little bit, how easy is it to get a job? There is age discrimination, and most of the time you're going to have to go in to an employer and say, I don't know what you're going to say. Are you going to lie? Are you going to tell the truth? I need the money. I'm looking for something to do. I'm a little bored. I'm a little lonely. Whatever it is. This job just interests me more personally. Whatever it is, whatever excuse you're going to use, how easy is it to get your foot in the door and get a job when you are in your 60s and maybe even 70s? I've been pretty fortunate that I could pass for a younger age. If I needed to go get a job now, I would have to explain 3 years on my resume where I wasn't working. I could say I retired early and, I was bored and I wanted to get some work in maybe for the next 10, 12 years and make them think it was a long-term thing, because odds are it's not for anybody who's retired who goes back to work. If you're looking at 2, 3 years, that's probably, again, all you're going to get because you're just not physically capable of it anymore, or the employer just doesn't want you around at that age anymore. And this is what I want to hear from you guys out there is, if you're working, what were the circumstances? How did you get that part-time job? Was it the part-time job you wanted? Did you have to settle for something, or did you target something? Hey, I want to be a starter at a golf course. I went to my local golf course, and they needed a starter and hired me, and I sit there in a golf cart for 10 hours a week or 15 hours a week, and I'm happy. They pay me enough to make it worth my while. And that's the other thing. If you need the money, what's enough? Can you get a part-time job at $10, $12, $15 an hour? And is that enough? In some areas, it may only be $7.50 an hour for whatever it is. There's a lot of states and cities that don't have a minimum wage above the national minimum wage of $7.25. On the other hand, there's some cities that are $15 an hour minimum, but if that's the case, the cost of living is likely higher. So they kind of go hand in hand. Tell me your experiences. Are you not working and thinking of getting a part-time job? What is your plan? What did you do if you are working part-time now when you weren't working? As far as me, when I quit, that was it. I'm not thinking of a part-time job. And then, as many of you know, recently my wife quit her job. And, now the market gets hit really big. And I'm thinking, do I need to go back to work? Should I go back to work? And if I did, what would I do? How would I do it? What would it look like? And I'd rather just, eat less food or, do something less than work. I really have no desire to work. The other side of it is I made a lot of money when I was working full time. And I don't mean to sound elitist, but I will. I made a lot of money, and if I were to go back to work, it would be a sixth, a seventh, an eighth, a tenth of the pay I was making per hour, if you want to look at it at an hourly rate. And if I made $100 a week, it would seem like such a paltry sum, but it's $5,000 a year, and it'd possibly make the difference. It just psychologically, it would be hard for me to go back to work for that amount of money. So I'll make some sacrifices first. Hopefully it'll never get to that. That shouldn't be an issue. Even if my wife doesn't go back to work, we should be fine. Knock on, whatever you want to knock on. So again, tell me your experiences. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you're going to do. Tell me about people you know who maybe had to go back to work. So from hot, sunny Florida, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye.